Shadows beneath the cabinet table. Some of the most consequential moments in the White House never appear in official transcripts. They unfold in rooms where doors stay closed, voices drop low, and decisions are shaped by tensions that rarely reach the public eye. On one unforgettable morning, a single disagreement beneath the surface of a cabinet meeting grew into a force powerful enough to alter the direction of the entire administration. To understand why this moment still resonates, we must look at how fragile unity can be at the highest levels of power. A cabinet room is designed to symbolize alignment, leaders sitting side by side, presenting a unified front to the world. But beneath that polished exterior lies a constant negotiation between personal conviction, political necessity, and national responsibility. When these forces collide, the table becomes less a symbol of stability and more a battlefield of competing truths. The day began with a sense of urgency. A pressing national issue demanded swift action, and the cabinet members arrived prepared to present their recommendations. Each believed their approach carried the answer. Each believed the stakes justified their certainty. But even before the meeting began, subtle clues hinted that something deeper was at play. A few advisors spoke in unusually guarded tones. Others avoided casual exchanges, focusing instead on documents they seemed reluctant to share. As the president entered the room, the atmosphere tightened. The briefing opened smoothly, with charts, reports, and projections laid out in orderly fashion. Yet beneath the rhythm of the discussion, an undercurrent of tension pulsed. One proposal, central to the entire strategy, carried assumptions that no one had fully addressed. And as the presentation continued, it became clear that the members seated around the table were far from aligned. The first sign of fracture surfaced when an advisor raised a single, precise question about the long-term implications of the plan. It was not confrontational, nor was it delivered with emotion, but the silence that followed was unmistakable. It wasn't the silence of contemplation. It was the silence of people who realized the question threatened to expose a fault line they had tried to conceal. The president sensed it immediately. Something wasn't being said, something important. And the moment that quiet resistance took shape, the meeting crossed an invisible threshold. The next decision would not be about policy alone. It would be about truth. Who understood it, who feared it, and who might be hiding more than the room expected. The question that had frozen the room hovered over the table like a shadow stretching across every conversation that followed. Cabinet members who had walked in confidence now found themselves recalculating their positions. Some offered clarifications wrapped in cautious phrasing. Others shifted uncomfortably, aware that the logic behind their earlier support was no longer as solid as they had believed. The foundation of the proposal was beginning to crack. As advisors attempted to rebuild their justification, the contradictions grew more visible. A timeline didn't align. A statistic cited as definitive turned out to be based on outdated assumptions. And a crucial variable, one that affected the entire strategic outcome, had been quietly minimized in previous discussions. Bit by bit, the room began to realize that the proposal's strength relied less on consensus and more on momentum, a force that now faltered under scrutiny. The president watched as the cabinet members tiptoed around the growing gaps in the argument. Their hesitations revealed a deeper truth. Someone had shaped the narrative guiding this proposal long before the meeting began. The direction of policy had been influenced not by shared analysis, but by decisions made behind separate doors, conversations held in corners, and a confidence that came from controlling information rather than presenting it openly. As pressure built, a subtle shift occurred. One advisor, sensing the unraveling logic, attempted to steer the conversation away from the weak points. Their tone was steady, but it carried an urgency that betrayed the stakes. Another joined in, echoing the importance of unity and the dangers of indecision. But their insistence only highlighted the growing divide between those defending the plan and those quietly questioning it. The conflict emerged fully when a cabinet member, usually reserved and diplomatic, broke their silence. They presented new data that directly contradicted the underlying assumptions of the proposal. The room reacted instantly. Some leaned forward, drawn by the clarity of the evidence. Others stiffened, recognizing that the argument supporting the plan had just lost its central pillar. Whispers of doubt turned into visible concern. The plan, once projected with confidence, now stood on unstable ground. Advisors searched for explanations, for reasons a discrepancy might be misinterpreted. But the more they tried to reconcile the contradiction, the more another question began to surface. Who knew this information before today? The president sensed the tension sharpening into something more than disagreement. This wasn't simply a clash of perspectives. It was a collision of two competing realities, one shaped by selective certainty, the other emerging from inconvenient truth. And as the debate intensified, the room edged toward a conflict that could not be contained by diplomacy alone. The shadows beneath the cabinet table were no longer figurative. They were taking shape, revealing the outlines of decisions made beyond the room, guided by motives yet to be named. The revelation of the contradictory data ignited a tension that could no longer be brushed aside. Cabinet members who had stayed silent now found themselves drawn into conflict, their expressions tightening as they realized the discussion had entered dangerous territory. The proposal that once seemed inevitable was now unraveling thread by thread, exposing layers of influence and intention that no one had fully acknowledged. The president called for a detailed explanation, but the response only deepened the divide. The advisor who had championed the proposal spoke with steady confidence, insisting the new data was incomplete, misleading, or taken out of context. Yet even as they defended their position, their voice carried a strain that betrayed the pressure mounting beneath the surface. They were no longer presenting a strategy. They were protecting it. Others challenged the logic with growing intensity. One pointed out inconsistencies in earlier briefings. Another questioned why certain reports had been excluded from the planning process. A third highlighted the pattern of narrow decision-making that seemed to center around a small circle within the administration. What began as a policy debate had transformed into a confrontation about transparency, authority, and trust. The conflict grew sharper when a senior cabinet member revealed an unsettling detail. Some of the foundational data used to justify the proposal had been circulated weeks earlier, but only to select individuals. Those who received it believed the entire cabinet was reviewing the same materials. Those who didn't had based their analysis on incomplete information. The realization hit the room with the force of a sudden storm. Voices rose, not in anger, but in urgency. How could a national strategy be built on uneven ground? Who decided what information was shared and what was withheld? And why had the decision-making process narrowed so drastically in recent months? The shadows beneath the cabinet table were deepening, revealing a chain of choices that had shaped the proposal long before this meeting began. The president demanded full clarity. Every piece of data, every conversation, every influence behind the plan. The advisor at the center of the storm hesitated, offering explanations that skirted the heart of the matter. Their reluctance spoke louder than any admission could. The room felt charged, as though the walls themselves were absorbing the tension. The cabinet members understood that they were no longer debating a single proposal. They were confronting the integrity of the process that produced it. Loyalties shifted, doubts crystallized, and silently, each person began recalculating their understanding of the power dynamics that had taken root within the administration. Then came the moment that broke the final layer of restraint. A cabinet member who had remained quiet through the entire conflict finally spoke. Their words were measured but unflinching. They revealed a private communication, one that indicated the proposal had been advanced not for strategic necessity, but to secure leverage in a separate, undisclosed negotiation. The room froze. This was no longer a disagreement. It was a fracture at the center of leadership, a revelation that exposed motives no one had anticipated. And with that truth now hanging in the air, the cabinet was forced to confront the full magnitude of the conflict they had stumbled into. The next step would not simply determine the fate of the proposal. It would determine the credibility of the administration itself. The president let the revelation settle, knowing that its impact would reshape more than the discussion. The proposal, once presented as a unified effort, now stood exposed as the product of selective influence and undisclosed ambition. The room that had entered the meeting seeking direction now found itself confronting the fragile boundaries of trust. The advisor at the center of the controversy lowered their gaze, aware that the private communication had crossed a line no cabinet could ignore. They attempted to explain, framing the maneuver as a strategic necessity, a tool to strengthen the administration's position in a separate negotiation. But even as they spoke, the justification rang hollow. The leverage gained had come at the cost of transparency, and now the entire team bore the consequences. The president's voice cut through the tension with a clarity that brooked no argument. Leadership, they reminded the room, depended not merely on outcomes, but on integrity in the decisions that shaped them. A single strategy pursued in secret might offer short-term advantage, but it risked eroding the foundation of trust essential for governing a nation. No negotiation, no matter how critical, justified compromising the unity of the cabinet. The final debate unfolded in measured tones. Some advisors urged salvaging elements of the proposal, believing the underlying strategy still held merit. Others insisted that any plan built on incomplete information would undermine the credibility of the administration. The president listened, weighing each perspective, but the path forward was already clear. The proposal would be withdrawn, not quietly, not buried, but formally and transparently. The cabinet would reset the strategy from the ground up, with every member participating openly in its reconstruction. The decision marked a turning point, a rejection of hidden influence, and a reaffirmation of collective responsibility. The advisor who had driven the original plan would be reassigned, their authority limited until trust could be rebuilt. As the meeting adjourned, a solemn understanding settled over the room. The administration had faced a moment that could have fractured it beyond repair. Instead, through confrontation and clarity, it found a way to restore its balance. The shadows beneath the cabinet table had been illuminated, revealing the cost of secrecy and the strength required to overcome it. In the quiet that followed, the president lingered a moment longer, reflecting on the weight of what had transpired. Leadership was not merely the ability to make decisions. It was the willingness to confront the truths that shaped them. And on this day, truth had emerged from the shadows, demanding accountability and offering a chance to rebuild. Subscribe to join the journey.